Work. 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 When I think about work, a flood of ideas and emotions enter my mind, like, could this meeting have been an email? But I thought you said HR was on our side. And what even is a TPS report? And didn't I tell you 3 months ago that this was going to be a disaster? Most of us don't enjoy work. We tolerate it. And before we can get that sweet cash money, there's always one last thing we have to deal with.
The boss.
Now, a good boss can make a miserable job more tolerable. But a bad boss, well, a bad boss can turn your dream job into a nightmare. You know what I'm talking about. The boss who turns a small problem into a catastrophe. The boss who fires all the great employees and gives raises to the lazy ones. The boss who ignores all your good advice and doubles down on bad decisions. And speaking of advice, you know that good advice you gave months ago? Well, now that everything's on fire, well, it's your fault that you weren't loud enough back then. If you can't tell by the intro, today we're going to be talking about some bad boss stories that I've had the pleasure of personally experiencing. Boss 1, the Foldername. Many years ago, when I was a young lad, I was doing web development for an older boomer guy. The boss didn't know HTML. He didn't understand computers.
Did you find the files?
I don't even know what they look. What do they look like?
They're in the computer.
They're in the computer?
He just wanted help with his website. He had a classic early 2000s webpage where every file was full of copy-pasted HTML. Each file had the same header and the same logo, and it was repeated across like 20 pages. So anytime you wanted to change the header, it meant you had to edit each of the 20 files in exactly the same way, or else it would look weird. My job was to fix all of that using this new and magical technology called PHP. I simplified everything using something called templates. These templates make the shared header part stay only in one file, and all the other files only have unique content. In other words, make it simple and maintainable. Also, I organized things into folders. And here arose the problem. You see, in his mentality, he wanted to control and understand everything. He wanted to know how to actually edit the web page. So I showed him. I said, here, just go to the templates folder and everything's inside. He said, well, how would I know that? And I said, well, you just remember to go to the templates folder and everything's there. And what happened next, I'll never forget. He starts yelling at maximum volume and he says, templates? How am I supposed to know that? I was shocked. I literally flinched in my skin. And he continued, change it, make it say, go here for changes.
Okay, you know what? You need to relax.
I was so surprised. I never had a boss yell at me like this. So I did what he asked. I renamed the folder. I updated every PHP file to point at the new stupid path. Go here for changes, exactly as requested, and I told him it was done. He nodded like the big bad problem had been solved, and I walked out of there thinking, I just witnessed a grown man have a meltdown over a folder name. It was ridiculous. So recently, as I was thinking about this story, I went and checked the FTP server. And would you believe it? He never edited anything, not even once. It was never about editing the website. It was about shouting down to Windows XP, hoping it would help him understand, how does the internet work? Boss 2, CI. I had recently joined the company. I noticed that the release system was a total mess. Every time they pushed software, testing was optional. That means we would ship a big question mark, and it was up to the customer to find out if it was working or not. So I suggested a sensible solution, continuous integration. You know, the thing that automatically builds your software and automatically finds any issues? And to my surprise, the boss actually agreed. So, well, why was I so surprised that he agreed? Well, he told me a story a while back, how he took over a company with 12 engineers. And he said the first person he fired on day one was the person who was maintaining the CI.
Hey, I got a new pair of shoes. You want to see them?
I guess so.
And he was proud of it. He said their position was totally useless. So when I suggested CI, and he agreed, I couldn't believe my ears. Now for the twist. So I worked on the CI for a few days, and everything was going great. I was able to catch some of the errors, but it was still pretty limited. As I worked, I realized that in order to make the CI catch every type of error and solve all our customer problems, I was going to need another piece of software called Docker. Now, before I tell you the next part, let me explain to you that the CI was costing us $15 a month, and Docker was going to be an additional $5 a month. So in total, this was going to cost us 0.1% on top of my salary. So to a rational person, this would be a no-brainer. So I got on a call with my boss, and I asked for a Docker subscription, and I'll never forget what he said next. He said, with a straight face, "If you give a mouse a cookie." I said, excuse me? He repeated, "If you give a mouse a cookie." I just sat there. He continued, "You know the children's story. If you give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask for milk. If you give him milk, he'll ask for a straw. If you give him a straw, he'll ask for a napkin, etc." My brain stopped. I had no idea what to say. At this point, I was still waiting for this to somehow become a discussion about software engineering. I said, "I don't understand. I'm not asking for a lot here. Docker is really cheap, and it'll help us solve our customer problems." And he said, and I'm quoting, "If you give a mouse a CI, he'll ask for Docker. If you give him Docker, he'll ask for apt-get," and on and on and on.
That's crazy!
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my ears. That was his argument. Not that Docker was expensive. Not that Docker wouldn't work or that there was something better. And that's when it hit me. I was talking to a grown man who was using a children's book as justification for not improving our engineering. And you know what? Maybe he was right. Because if you give a customer an invoice, he'll pay it. And if he pays it, he'll ask for a receipt. And if he asks for a receipt, eventually he's going to start expecting the software to actually work. Needless to say, Docker was never added, the customer problems never went away, and I never worked there again. Boss 3. Subversion. Now the story takes place at a hardware company. The company policy was that all the files should be tracked using Subversion.
Is that bad?
Well, not good.
Now, if you aren't familiar, Subversion is ancient software, and it hasn't received updates for years. Older companies might still use it, but in general, everyone has left Subversion behind and switched to Git. Now, Git is the modern file tracking software, and everybody uses it for good reasons. But the boss of this relatively new company had decided that everybody would start on Subversion, and everybody would stay on Subversion. Now remember, this is a hardware company, so esoteric technology with weird reasons is normal. In fact, it's normal to run into hardware guys emailing zip files back and forth, claiming they always have a backup.
Still doing that, huh?
So me finding Subversion wasn't exactly a shock. But nothing could prepare me for this conversation about Git. Now, I had convinced the software team of 2 people to use Git. It was honestly amazing that the boss even agreed to this, but he had a way of always crapping all over Git every chance he got. And went a little something like this. The boss would say, "You know, Subversion is better than Git." And I would always say, "No, I disagree." And he would say, "See, the problem with Git is that everyone is allowed to work by themselves. Subversion is better because people have to work together. With Git, everyone can be alone and never interact. See, they stay on their own branches, and then nobody ever knows which branch is the latest, and that's a problem." And when I heard this, I couldn't believe my ears. I said, "Have you ever heard of merging?" He had not. And then suddenly everything clicked. This wasn't a debate about Git versus Subversion. I was arguing with somebody who didn't understand what merging was. And merging isn't some minor feature of Git. Merging is the whole reason Git exists. Merging allows you to collaborate with your coworkers without demanding centralized control. It's the perfect support for the best idea wins versus my way or the highway. Because without merging, there is no collaboration. Only one person deciding and everyone else bending over backwards to catch up. Which, if I'm honest, described his management style perfectly. He didn't really want collaboration. He wanted to dictate orders and expect everyone else to ignore their better judgment and follow along. He wanted a source control program called "Do What I Say or You're Fired." So when he said Git was bad because it allowed people to work independently, what he really meant was Git was allowing people to get work done at all. And that's when I stopped trying to convince him. Because at that point, we weren't discussing version control anymore. We were discussing whether Subversion was just software for micromanagement but with better branding. So what can we learn from these bad boss stories? None of these conversations were really about the technology. Actually, the decisions were made based on one thing and one thing only: how much control the boss would lose. Anything that reduced their ability to micromanage got rejected instantly. It was never about the technology, it was always about control. Thanks for watching. Smash the like button, like and sub and like. Don't click it twice. All right, see ya.